Well, welcome back to a new video. Today we're working on the Triumph Roadster once again, and I believe we're on to part 14 or perhaps 15 now. Either way, in the last episode we finally got the brakes just about working, but we couldn't quite get the pressure from the master cylinder to activate the cylinders as much as we would like, despite plenty of bleeding. So in this episode I'm going to remove the master cylinder, which, let's face it, has 70-year-old seals in it, unless it's been previously redone at some point. So either way, it is definitely in need of some attention. I'm going to remove it and have it redone, or exchange it for a rebuilt unit from the Triumph Roadster Club. So I'm going to be removing it, and hopefully at the end of the video you'll see me fit the new one, and then we can once again bleed the brakes, and fingers crossed they actually work this time. So what are we waiting for? Let's get going with that now. So here is the master cylinder down here. I've just been pressing the pedal from the inside and there's no pressure in it whatsoever, so I think the seals must be really quite badly perished in there. Of course there's no way of really telling, but one can assume from having a 70-year-old car which hasn't been on the road for the majority of its life that the seals will have gone. So I can see that there's this large bolt which runs through the bottom of it here. There are also the two lines which go front and rear, and I don't know if those four little screws there hold it into position or if that's for something else, because I can't see a metal part in there. I'll have to look at the workshop manual and see if there's anything else holding it on, but I will start by taking off those things which I've already identified. So I've now loosened the master cylinder sufficiently. I've taken off the larger banjo bolt which was securing the two lines on, that just went in down there, and the large bolt which went through here. The bolt was a bit difficult to get out because the rubber had perished and was actually holding it in. So what I did was I got this clamp and I put the nut back on loosely, and then I just tightened the clamp up and squeezed it out using the flange here of the sort of chassis joint to lever it, and then the final bit was done with a normal pry bar. So that's that bit done. I'm now going to have a look inside and try and carefully remove some of the 70-year-old carpet and see if I can get this bit out. Luckily it's quite loose, so those four little screws around it weren't holding it in, but I think I might just have to take off the pedal rubber or the actual sort of pedal end somehow to get it out of the car itself. Other than that, it's almost there. So I've got the rubber here and it will come off. I'm trying to be gentle with it because obviously I'd like to put the original back on if I can. There we are, and that nut looks like the sort of thing I'll have to take off to get the actual this actual pedal part off and get it out of the car. So I'll see if I can get a socket on there because that's slightly recessed. Here we are. It's very difficult to film in here because narrow sort of opening. There we are. So I'll take that off carefully. Hopefully there isn't a washer. Oh, there is a washer. Spring washer underneath. Ooh. That's the spring on there. There's that spring washer. Put that there next to the nut. How does that come off? Does that just flick off? I might have to sort of lever that off with a screwdriver. So now I've taken the pedal off the inside and all of the spring bits have come out, I should just be able to carefully remove it from the car. I've forgotten to take the wires off there, so I'll quickly do that. That shouldn't be difficult at all. Give me a second. There we are. One master cylinder. So here is the master cylinder, all off the car and ready to be refurbished. As you can see, it's a fairly simple device, but I don't know if this particular unit is only for the Triumph Roadster or if it was common to a number of different cars. Of course, this is the pedal end. I've reassembled it just to keep it all together. That's the brake light switch, and this is the banjo bolt where the fluid comes out. So I will see what the next steps for getting this working properly will be, and you will hopefully see it in the next part of the video. So here we are, considerably later, and what I have is one newly refurbished brake master cylinder. As you can see, it's been polished up and it's come up really quite a treat. It's currently got fluid in it, which is why it's got that cap, and I've got the original banjo bolt down there, but the fluid inside it allows me to demonstrate that it now holds pressure nice and firmly, and it's got all new seals. I'm now going to refit it to the car, and hopefully we'll be able to bleed the brakes and finally get some stopping action in force. So, I have now refitted the banjo bolt and its corresponding brake lines, as well as the wires for the brake lights, as you will see underneath. The next thing I'm going to do is obviously take the cap off again, which has been tightened up, and I will refill it with brake fluid, and then we can get on with, once again, bleeding the brake cylinders. Joy, I've spent so much of my life already bleeding those brake cylinders. But hopefully this will be the last time for a while. So we'll keep doing that, and hopefully eventually we'll have some bled brakes, which is much better than the results we were having last time, because as you'll remember, we were barely getting any progress of the fluid through the tube, so the seals in the master cylinder must have been quite poor. Although, having said that, the brake company didn't need to sleeve it at all, so the cylinder itself was in quite good condition, considering it was probably untouched for the last 50 or so years. Alright, now it's currently a few months later, and I have had no luck whatsoever bleeding the brakes. Every time we try to bleed them, the master cylinder seemed to work alright. It would pump fine, but there would be air in every stroke. And so we've been doing this for a number of months, and I've taken the master cylinder out, and I noticed that the seal seemed fine and everything had been rebuilt correctly as far as I could tell, but there wasn't any form of gasket or anything between the two castings of the master cylinder itself. So I tried making a little gasket and putting that in, and we'll see how that fares. Whether that makes any difference to the quantity of air coming through, but it's most annoying and it's taken us a very long time. So in the meantime, I thought I would have a break from that and see what ideas could come to mind in the meantime. And instead I'm going to focus on getting the headlamps, the horn and various other electrical things working. Just earlier, a few minutes ago, I managed to fix this oil pressure light on the dashboard, which had never worked previously. I didn't know why, but as you can see, it now works fine. But I think the reason for its non-functional behaviour was a tiny wire which is soldered to the stupid connection. The connection works by having a single brass rod which runs through the centre with a thread on it at this end and a little spring plunger on the other, and there is this tiny wire for the sort of ground connection which just touches, I think it was once soldered, to the ring which sits on the outside encased in a sort of Bakelite washer, and you have to be very careful they don't touch and short. And of course there are no fuses, so it's a recipe for disaster waiting to happen, but it is now working. I had to take the whole thing apart and I cleaned all the connections and everything, because I still couldn't work out why it wasn't working. But it was that tiny wire, which you will see is soldered to that blob there, that blob just there, and is supposed to be soldered on the other end to that one there. But it means that you can't take the bulb holder out without breaking the wires. So I assume that in the past someone has disassembled it and broken the wire, and that's why it wasn't working. But on an interesting note, you can actually lever up the entire instrument binnacle by undoing these two wing nuts. That's such a sensible idea. The next thing I'm going to turn to are the lights and the horn. The lights, the dimming and dipping, are controlled by this flicker here, which does absolutely nothing. The lights are of course controlled by the switch on the ignition key, but the horn doesn't work either, although the indicators, or rather trafficators, do, and the self-cancelling works on those, so I don't know what's going on. Anyway, I think I'm going to try and fiddle around with the multimeter at the bottom of the steering column, which is where all the wires come out, and we'll see what we can find. Now, in terms of establishing why the headlamps don't work, I'm going to try and see if I can test the voltage at the dip versus full switch on the steering centre boss. And the way to access that is by actually loosening this little joint down here. So I've got this socket. I've got an 11/32 socket, and if I put that here and undo it, it undoes like that. There is another one on the other side, unfortunately, so when I tighten that up I'll have to grip it somehow, probably with a small spanner. But that should have just loosened it slightly, so now if I go inside the car, I should be able to turn the centre boss and just pull it out slightly enough that I can undo the three little screws on the back and hopefully test the voltage. I have already tested the voltages down here, and with the switch in either position there is no power flowing to the lights. The ground for the lights is tucked away down here in the darkness, and it's grounded also in the headlamp itself. So there shouldn't be a problem with the ground. However, the fog lamp, or sorry, it's not fog lamp, spot lamp, I suppose it could be wired up as a fog lamp. Fog lamp switch does work and activate these two loose wires, because the car did have fog lamps on it in the spot lamps, sorry, in the 1960s. So that's presumably what they were for, and they're activated by a foot switch down there, which is obscured behind the driver's carpet to the left of the clutch. So I'll step inside the car now, so hopefully you can see. And I'll give this a wiggle. Oh, okay, that's freed. It didn't turn like this before. Just gently, because I don't want to have to undo the wires. I'll just try and pull it out ever so slightly. So there. That's about as far as I want to take it. But there should be 3 screws in the back. Ah yes, there's one. That's good. You can see it better than I can. That will release the front plate and hopefully allow me to check for voltage down here on the full or dip beam switch. Everything else in here works fine, so I assume it's not the voltage going in, because that would mean that the indicators in the horn wouldn't work. So I think perhaps there's a connection problem somewhere else. But if we get 12 volts here and it goes out the other end, that'll be an excellent bit of progress to establishing where the fault lies in the system. Now, as I was undoing the screws, which I've put safely on the ground down there, next to the rat poison, I noticed that, like that, there's rather a lot of crumbly material inside the actual boss. And having seen the horn, yes, we have yet another wasp infestation. These are very old wasps as well. I mean, they're absolutely disgusting. They've been there a very long time and clearly couldn't get out. So I don't know what they're up to. Anyway, just another thing to clear out, but I'm surprised it was working as well as it was in that state. The spring I have here, it's just attacked me. So that presumably goes on there to activate the horn button. So that's all right. Got everything. I'll put that down with the screws. And this here is the switch for the lights, which was probably not assisted by the quantity of wasp. I hear on the Lucas workshop manuals for Australia, they list poor contacts and wasp infestations as common faults, but no, that's probably not true, is it? Anyway, so I think I'll very gently check that there aren't any shorts, and I'll reconnect the battery, and then I'll see if flicking these... Actually, first I'll test the continuity. If there's no continuity between the switch, then it obviously needs cleaning. But if there is, then I'll reconnect the battery and fiddle around with the voltages here and check that we are getting some. Because if we aren't, then that means that the problem lies further back in the system, possibly somewhere towards the voltage regulator. Good. So I've got the lights on now, and if I check the voltage, I've got the multimeter down here, so you probably won't be able to see it. I'm not getting any voltage across the pins for the dim or the full beam, dip or full beam. If I measure it across the horn though, this is going to be interesting, like so, you can see right down the bottom, out of focus, we get 12 volts nearly. There. But on the horn, there is, not on the horn, on the lights, there is absolutely nothing. So I think the problem is even before it gets into the steering column, it's somewhere further back, because the wires would just run up inside here for the 12 volt feed and then go through the switch and back out. Well, I just took the chrome cover off the horn, and as you can see there is an interesting wasp's nest inside, which was probably not helping matters, and the connector is completely and utterly furred up, so I probably should have checked this first, but now I think it'll be a fairly easy matter to clean it up, so that's what I'm going to do now. So while I've got the horn cover off, I'm going to test the voltage at the pins, and for some reason it seems to get 2 volts constantly, and then when we press the horn button, press please, it does go up to 12, so this is clearly a problem with the horn itself. No wonder, having wasps inside it, rather than being in the column as I initially thought. But it still doesn't explain why the headlamps don't work. So what I will try now, I've taken the screw out of this one, and we'll see if there is a wasp in here. This one's held on rather better. Hopefully it kept the wasps out. I'll just remove that one, and then we will work out how to clean up the mechanisms. Oh yes. Oh dear. It's even worse. Well, I think that's rather solved that problem. Or yes, that's quite disgusting. Yep, there we are. Oh, that was underwhelming. All the dead wasps are still in here. Alright, so I've removed the second one, and now we will see what happens when we open it. Oh. And, oh. Careful that gasket. That needs some very thorough cleaning. Alright, so I've now repaired this one and put it back in place. The diaphragm and everything was de-rusted. Luckily the lower parts were all fine. They have this lovely crackle black finish from Lucas as original, but the main parts I put rust converter on any spots that remained, so hopefully they should be fine. I put it back in and popped the wires on. I also cleaned the contacts and adjusted the little contact point to allow it to touch, because it wasn't touching after I'd rubbed all the corrosion off it. So I will now reconnect the battery and press the horn, and we shall see what happens. Aha! Well, that's something anyway. Press. Yes. Now, with the two horns back in place, I can see that they are both working reasonably well. This one works absolutely fine, and there's no arcing from the points when they open and close. It's an interesting mechanism, because you have the electromagnet which is cut in and out by the points, which are themselves actuated by the movement of the little diaphragm magnet down here, which then moves up and down, pushing this rod which opens and closes the points. That one works absolutely fine, so I'm not going to touch that. This one, however, has been adjusted all the way down, and there is still a gap between the push rod and the sort of spring-loaded contact. So I'm going to try and raise the height of the diaphragm magnet there to try and improve that, and then I can have a bit more adjustment in the points themselves, because that's not ideal. And this one also arcs rather badly, which would of course wear out your points eventually. So I'm going to take it apart again, and there's a little nut inside with, it's a lock nut with a screw, and you undo the screw and hopefully it will allow the magnets to be raised slightly to give the push rod a bit more action. Now I'm just adjusting the points slightly. So what you want is you want the contacts here just to touch when this is in the lowered position, so that it's in the normal position. And then that way, when the magnet is in the raised position, you should get the maximum clearance between the two to stop them arcing. So if I now tighten this up again, what I've been doing is, unfortunately I don't have a proper spanner for this today, but I loosened the lock nut just using the socket, and then I tighten this back up again. And unfortunately I've got a bit too much gap here, so I will adjust that with pliers, and very carefully of course, just so that the two touch, and then when the magnet raises it'll open the points like so. And I've disconnected the other horn, so let's give it a try. Press. It's still a bit of arcing, but it's not too bad. Again. Let's have a final check with both. Lovely. Interestingly, while we were doing the horn, we thought it might be an interesting idea to see if we could knock the dent out here. We didn't actually record it because we didn't think it would work, but we got the rubber mallet, and we had a piece of wood on the other side, and we were able to largely remove this dent, which has been here for years now, and it's bothered me every time I came into the garage. So I'm really glad that that's better. All that'll require is some slight fettling and probably a skim of filler, and then it'll be perfect. You won't notice it at all. We were so surprised that this actually worked, because this is steel. The rest of the car is aluminium, but they made the front two wings out of steel because they were such large pressings. The aluminium wouldn't have been strong enough, so we thought it would be a nightmare to try and knock that out, but it actually come out pretty cleanly as well. So that's a real surprise and a great positive. So there we are. Who needs brakes anyway when you've got horns to tell people you can't stop? But I think it's about time for a nice cup of tea. So that's about it for this one. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I will say thank you very much for watching, and ta-ta for now.